to spend the next hour breaking down what we have seen so far in the coaching carousel. Now, at the risk of jinxing it, which we've done in years past, we're not going to say put a bow on it. We're not going to say the coaching carousel is done spinning, because there is still time in an NFL coaching carousel, which could impact things. But this is a nice chance to take our breath and look at some of the changes that there have been. We're going to go conference by conference: Big Ten, SEC, ACC, Big 12. And then, before we get out of here, do a little bit of superlatives. So let's dive into the coaching changes that we have seen in the Big Ten. And of course, we are going to start with the job that was open for 54 days. Penn State made a move on James Franklin after a couple of head-scratching losses, and then they began a search that went on and on and on. A lot of candidates connected to this job, but ultimately it goes to Matt Campbell. So as we look at how we got here and what it means for Penn State moving forward, Tom, you, as I've given you credit for already, called Matt Campbell a candidate that you thought would be a good hire. Took them a while to get there, but they landed it. So what do you see about Matt Campbell in terms of being the next leader of the Penn State football program?
Well, first of all, hold on. Let me get my Matt Campbell hat bill going here, so that way we could discuss it. Listen, yeah, I thought this was a great hire. I thought the process was awful, clearly, that it took this long to go through it. And they were so publicly kind of turned down as many times as they were, where we thought, BYU's Kalani Sitake was going to end up taking it. And then the Cookie Man got involved and kept him at BYU. But I do think that sometimes bad process can lead to a good result, and I think that is what happened here with Penn State. The reason I mentioned Matt Campbell as a candidate for the job, and my top candidate for the job when it first opened, was simply because I do think that it is a good fit for what Penn State is looking for and what Penn State needs. Matt Campbell, if you look at what he's done at Iowa State, he's been the most successful coach in that program's history, and that is not a program that has a whole lot of success or has had an easy time of winning football games, but he's done as good a job of it as anybody with the Cyclones. And I think if you look at how he does it, where it's, developing talent, identifying the talent, and then, producing NFL talent out of it. And then also we've seen him go through coordinators on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. Guys have left that program to go elsewhere, and he's been able to replace them and keep things going in the same direction without really skipping a beat. That's what you need. That's what you should be looking for somebody who's going to be running a high-profile program, because if Penn State's winning, other schools are going to poach your coaches. They're going to want them. They're going to want to taste your success. And I think that Matt Campbell has proven he can replace those guys. So I think when you look at it all, there's a lot of stuff to like. Of course, the situation also points out that he hasn't been at a job with the expectations that Penn State has. It's one thing to punch above your weight. It's another to be one of the heavyweights fighting in that class and beating other heavyweights. We do not know if he can do that. Just based on everything that he's been able to do in Ames, I'm confident that he's as qualified to do it as anybody else.
I mean, I completely agree with that. I think if you look at Matt Campbell, like coaching-wise, organizationally, program-wise, fantastic. Like player development, great. Player ID, excellent. Also, like a pretty good identifier of coaching talent as well, if you look at kind of how his tree has started to spread out. The only question I have about Matt Campbell at Penn State is, how do you relate to the five-star kids? How do you relate to the guys who sometimes are kind of a diva, right? And you can say, oh, we're going to have a culture, we're going to build it from the ground up, like you said in the press conference, all that stuff. But guess what? If you want to win the 13th, 14th, 15th game, you need some of these guys who are really good and who act like they know that they are really good. And it's a different type of player, a different type of personality to coach. So that's my only real question here with Penn State and Matt Campbell. Like, how does he handle that type of player? Because he hasn't signed any of those at Iowa State. They don't get those type of guys with that level of talent and the attitude that comes with it.
Yeah, and that is our secret word of the day, 5-star, which is a great reminder to watch 5-Star, the new docuseries on Paramount Plus, which includes our very own Bud Elliott as a contributor. 5-Star, tracking the path from so many through the recruiting process to college stardom. Watch it on Paramount Plus, a mountain of entertainment. But I like your point. Yes, sometimes 5-stars are a diva. Sometimes you are going to have to be able to have a little bit of a different recruiting pitch as you start to think about the staff that is going to be assembled, and not just like the coaching staff, but the support staff around it. Do you think that Penn State as a recruiting operation, which I think was doing a pretty good job already under James Franklin, do you think that they are prepared to be able to carry on some of the modernization that Franklin led during his time with that program?
It's not a no, it's an I don't know. We're going to have to see what kind of we're going to have to see what kind of support they put around Matt Campbell. Like Matt Campbell is going to need to bring in some guys from other programs who have recruited high-level athletes before, because Iowa State did not get those guys, as I said. So like interacting with them, understanding that like these guys have agents and handlers and like just a different like amount of like people around them. Who's actually calling the shots in this recruitment? So I would expect that Penn State like will probably talk to Matt Campbell and say, hey, we understand you're loyal to your guys. You want to bring your guys, obviously, from Iowa State. But we do think it's important you bring in some guys who have been at like, a Georgia or an Ohio State or like one of these programs that consistently recruits, top 8, top 10, because it's a little bit different way of doing things.
You want to talk about a different profile. Pat Fitzgerald was a long run, and a run that I think that you have to say is undeniably was a success, particularly at its peak at Northwestern. Obviously, it did not end well. You've got lawsuits. You've got a firing that happened right before the season. It was messy at the end. No other way to put it. But Pat Fitzgerald, he won his lawsuit, and now he's back in the Big Ten, and now he's at Michigan State. Tom, what are going to be the adjustments for Pat Fitzgerald as now he takes on a program that is a public school versus a private school, a much bigger school, one with different academic restrictions, and also, I would say, different expectations, because Michigan State, while they have been down bad these last couple of years, this is still a program that wants to be a top half of the Big Ten competitive team. How do you see that Pat Fitzgerald situation coming together? And also, if you could give us any insight into how we got here, because this was among the fastest, right? It's the reverse Penn State. Penn State took 54 days. I mean, was it even 54 hours? I'm not sure if it was 54 hours from Jonathan Smith out to Pat Fitzgerald in. What do you make of this hire in East Lansing?
Yeah, this is one of the more polarizing hires, I think, of the cycle. Some people love it. Some people are very confused by it. I tend to skew more towards the love it side, because as far as the differences between Northwestern and Michigan State that you asked about, that Chip, it's kind of the same situation that we just discussed with Matt Campbell. Now, Michigan State's not Penn State. They're not routinely at the top of the Big Ten and fighting for college football playoff and thinking of themselves as a national title contender. But at Northwestern, Pat Fitzgerald was the underdog punching above his weight. And now at Michigan State, they want to compete with Michigan. They want to compete with that top half of the Big Ten. And I think the one thing he will have to adjust to, and I don't think he's going to have a difficult time adjusting to, is recruiting a different kind of player. Because when you're at Northwestern and with the academic restrictions that they place on their, school and their students, there are a lot of players, and not just the 5 stars and the 4 stars, who are really not eligible to be playing for your program because they don't have the grades. I think for Pat Fitzgerald, he's going to find a far easier time recruiting, because some of the guys that he's wanted to get before at Northwestern that he didn't have access to, he can bring to Michigan State, and he can sell the ability to compete towards the top of the Big Ten. So I think that will be an adjustment, but I also do think that he's equipped for it. And I think that he was more coaching for the situation he had, not coaching to a certain situation that he believes in.
I think I agree with that overall. I look at this and I do worry that Fitz has, like, can he recapture the magic? And I'm open to the idea that he can, right? Because he did visit so many other programs out there. I've heard him on various interviews talking about what he learned from visiting guys and like how there's new ways of doing things and how he's actually excited to embrace an era of NIL. But I have a hard time shaking that. Like, I mean, they were terrible in the Big Ten in their final 3 non-COVID seasons. He actually had a great COVID year somehow, but ultimately 2019, 2021, and 2022, I'm just going to need a little more convincing on the field, I think, to believe that he still's got it. Because like some of those hires he made were really poor when he lost important guys, and obviously he's going to have to hire well there. I just don't know like how that's going to work out. We'll see. Maybe he still has it.
Well, we go from a couple of, university profile changes to a coach that has just been on the rise rapidly, because you heard at Holy Cross, there was a coach named Bob Chesney, who was a name to watch, maybe connected to a few jobs there in the Northeast. Ultimately, he lands at James Madison after Kurt Cignetti heads off to Indiana. And then, whoa, now you're off at UCLA. Daggum. Okay, so Bob Chesney's gone from Holy Cross to UCLA, being in the Big Ten very, very quickly. But for fans who are not aware, what should they know? What is the book on Bob Chesney, in your opinion? And what do you make in terms of the outlook for UCLA football with him at the helm?
So I think he's a guy who does score a lot of points with whatever offense he chooses to run. They consistently won at Holy Cross. They came in, didn't really miss a beat too much from what Curt Cignetti was doing there at James Madison, which is pretty impressive, especially when you consider what Cignetti has gone on to do at Indiana and some of the players that Cignetti took off this James Madison roster. That the guy is really like just a winner, man. I know that sounds crazy, but like, and I know a lot of people have won obviously at James Madison. I think there's some institutional stuff in that program that allows you to have success, especially as they moved up from the FCS to the FBS. UCLA is a whole nother ballgame. I have no idea if he's going to work out at UCLA. And I'm not trying to steal Tom's bit about great hire. I have no idea it works out. Like literally, like, where's UCLA going to play their football games next year? Are they in the Rose Bowl or are they going to be in SoFi Stadium? Or like, what kind of money do they have to spend on the roster? What kind of money do they have to spend on coaches and especially assistant coaches, right? If you pay an analyst $100,000 in Penn State, he's living pretty good. If you pay an analyst $100,000 at UCLA, how far away from your stadium does he have to live in a place that he feels safe and feels good and his family is happy? Probably like an hour and 40, right? So you're gonna have to like the spend if you're in a major city like that where the cost of living is so high is so significant. And I do wonder, like, can they get good people aside from just the 11 on the coaching staff? Like how quality are your analysts? How quality are some of your other assistants, like your assistant offensive line coach and things like that? Guys who interact with the players every day and have a real impact on your program.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to the coaching hire side of this, like there is signal to me to coaches who win at a high level at multiple, different levels, whether it's at the FCS Division II. Like when you're consistently moving up and winning, that tends to bode well for your ability to succeed at your next stop as you continue moving forward. It's just you might not have the Curt Cignetti where you're suddenly number one in the country competing for national titles, but you could be like a Lance Leipold where you're taking a Kansas program that was a perennial doormat and now you're competing at least for bowl games every year. And I think that is a similar situation to what UCLA is dealing with Chesney. But as Bud was touching on, there's a lot about this UCLA job that makes it a very difficult place to win that will rely on far more than just, are you a good football coach? Because I do think Bob Chesney is a very good football coach, but as Bud was talking about, there are a whole lot of other parts to this equation that need to be figured out and solved. And maybe with Bob's, his relationships and his ability to win at every other level, maybe he's the guy to solve that puzzle and figure it out and help UCLA get to a place where it gets to, competing in its new conference at the top level, because UCLA's first couple seasons in the Big Ten have not gone very well.
Yeah, and Matt Campbell gets right to work at Penn State. Pat Fitzgerald gets right to work at Michigan State. Bob Chesney still is leading James Madison in the college football playoff. He will be out facing Big Ten foe Oregon in the first round matchup with the Dukes. So still some work left to be done at JMU for Chesney, though I'm sure that that binder is being filled with lots of ideas and plans for the Bruins as well.